Here we are today, Max and Chuck coming to you live on Facebook. We're going to talk about the 2020 Global Cities Index from AT Kearney, which came out like a week or two ago. We've been struggling to find a time where we could get together and chat about them. So, Chuck, you did not look at these rankings prior to us coming on today, and it's a surprise for me as well, although we have to admit that we kind of glanced at them in the last couple minutes, but
yes,
it is so the surprise is over. But anything stand out to you?
Yes. So compared to the other major report which came out recently, which is from Resonance, and we talked about that a few weeks earlier, it's a lot more of an orthodox list, I feel like. You had a lot of the higher up cities on the previous report, like Abu Dhabi was in the top 15, Las Vegas was in the top 30. And those are places that, while they're well-known commodities, they're generally not considered, necessarily major cities or brands yet beyond their, touristic value. So this one, you see a lot more predictable. I feel like you see a lot of capitals. You see a lot of kind of like regional centers. Those are some initial things I see.
Yeah, I think as you're saying with orthodoxy, it skews much more towards business and sort of intercultural exchanges and politics as well. So it's kind of maybe not all commerce, but things that are related to that area. Yeah. Whereas just pure from a marketing standpoint and brand standpoint, I think Resonance gives a lot more credit to cities that do well in that area and tourism. And so that's how we have some of these surprises and outliers in the Resonance rankings.
Well, I think it's kind of that thing of thinking of the city as an overall business versus the city kind of as a commodity, as a brand, as a identity, which, I think Orlando also was one that, did very well in the Kearney list or on the, best cities list, but maybe not so well in the Kearney list. So,
well, let's look at some of these. You did mention a few. So should we do like I don't know, we'll take it in sections. We'll look at a top 30.
We can take it in sections. So,
okay. So
I guess I'll start, just kind of for me being in, Florida in general. And so seeing Miami make the top 30 in both these lists. Now it came in at 30, but, it's definitely showing its relevance. And really the impressiveness here is that it's the youngest kid on the block here, or at least one of the younger ones, and that Miami really is only in a 100-year-old city. And yet it's kind of pushed to the forefront recently. And so it's, I think in the last decade, it's become much more broad in terms of its business and kind of other appeals beyond just the beach and kind of nightlife.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Miami has made the list at the 30th spot for a few years. So they're not exactly a newcomer, but they're hanging in there. And also between looking at the numbers 21 through 30, we can see Dubai and Barcelona, which were surprisingly high, I believe, for Resonance.
Yes, they were both in top 10, I think. Yeah.
So that's kind of a divergence right there. Probably for similar reasons that we were just discussing. I think their cachet and their name recognition is much stronger than perhaps, I guess, their true footing in sort of business and commerce.
Yeah. And I think another, interesting thing here is just to see how well Buenos Aires does here, because, really it seems to be the leader for Latin America, kind of representing it here in the top 25. And while it's not an unknown place, in a lot of cases, I feel like Rio de Janeiro is probably, the most well-known city in that region. And I think Sao Paulo and Mexico City are widely considered, more major population centers, business centers. So I'm curious to see what exactly went into Buenos Aires doing so well.
Right. Yeah, as you're saying, I think I could be wrong, just glancing very quickly here, but I think South America on the residence list was the highest representation was Sao Paulo at 44, which
Right.
which Buenos Aires coming in at 26 or 25 for Kearney is a huge difference.
Yeah, yeah.
What makes it so? Honestly, I don't know. I don't know that much about South America in general, and particularly Buenos Aires' connections from a political business standpoint.
Yeah, yeah. So, but obviously, really interesting place at very least. So,
Certainly.
so
I guess one other thing to mention is Boston. So another American city coming in the top 30.
Yeah.
And for good reason.
Yeah, I mean it's really a global center of higher education and innovation, and many of the categories that they heavily weigh, Boston is a strong performer in.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it did score pretty well with resonance at 35. So not top 30, but
yeah,
it did do pretty well. Okay, so moving to the next tier, 11 through 20 for Kearney. What jumps out at you there?
So actually, Toronto's at 19, and so it's not necessarily especially great compared to where it is on other lists like this. But I think something that differentiates Kearney in its rankings of urban global brands is that it has not only a present ranking list, but it also has a future cities index. So what was shocking to me was I think Toronto came in second overall in that list. I think only behind. I think London has been in his top spot there for a number of years, but just to see Toronto going up that high, I think they're very bullish on its future and kind of how it will continue to rise.
Yeah, you're right. In the futures ranking, we can see their rankings over the past 5 years or 6 years, and Toronto was not scoring that high before. So this is the year that they're really expecting to see Toronto take off. Looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good eye. I'm also noticing we have some, not some, but we have a representative from China, Shanghai, which is placed at 12, right between Sydney and San Francisco. And I just note that because that was one of the things we talked about with the resonance list was that
it very low on China. I think now it's like 76 or something, way down the list.
Yep.
And it's much better represented here.
Yeah, that's true. Anything else?
A number of European capitals in the middle. I just wanted to see.
All right. Looks like we lost Chuck. I don't think that he will be able to get back soon. Otherwise, I just kind of riff on my own. But we'll try to continue this later. Go.
Right. So we're back, everyone. Sorry for my technical difficulties on my end. My computer just decided now would be a great time to install some new updates. So yeah, so the updates are getting installed. So
you were talking about European capitals, right?
Yes. So Brussels was at 14, and so it's actually ahead of Berlin and Madrid and Moscow, which are much larger and more well-known European centers of commerce and capital. And so I was curious about the variable for that, but one of the variables in the 5, because it measures kind of hard and soft power, was political engagement. And Brussels actually came in at number 1 for 3 of the individual variables and the overall leader for that category. So I feel like sometimes that, an especially strong performance in one of those, might lead to it doing as well as it has. I mean, Brussels actually, I think, at city limit level, it only has about 200,000 people.
Yeah. It's definitely punching above its weight in general, but especially in this list.
Oh yeah. So.
Cool.
In the top 10, or I mean, on the 11 through 20.
The second 10, yeah. Just point out the U.S. representation with San Francisco at 13, which feels about right.
Yeah, I'd say, yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Residents had them at
they
14.
continue to rise depending on how much of a kind of a grasp it has on the technology market. I mean, it's the global technology hub right now, or arguably so. It deserves kind of where it's at.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, then, top 10. I'll start walking backwards. So starting at 10, we have Washington, D.C., which, capital of the U.S., pretty strong geopolitical influence, as well as commerce and,
it's a little better than it does on some of these other lists. But again, I think that this list really is focused with power and, in any form. And DC really is all about that, from, the international organizations to government offices and everything that are based there.
Yeah, it looks like Kearney has them pretty steadily in the last 6 years, including this one. They've been 10th 5 of those 6 years.
Right.
And they dropped to 11th at one of those years. So
yep.
They pretty much hold the spot down.
Yeah.
Number 9 this year is Singapore, which is a little bit of a drop from previous years.
Yeah. But it's still very solid. It's definitely, without question, one of the leaders in that region. And I think probably its performance in the future index will help to keep it there, moving forward. It's just, it seems to always be at the forefront of whatever is new and relevant with cities.
Yeah. As you mentioned, Kearney has Singapore at number 3 this year for the futures.
Yeah.
So moving on, then number 8 for this year is Chicago.
Yeah, where Kearney is based. So,
that may have
it's a pretty good finish for Chicago. I'd say it is obviously a global city, but it's kind of, I guess, as a Midwesterner, it's kind of good to see a city from that region performing so well there.
Right, and this is normal for Chicago. They've been 8th for the last 3 years. Prior to that, they were 7th. So they're basically holding steady.
Yeah.
Number 7, Kearney has Los Angeles.
Yep. So, and again, that's a really dynamic place. It's I think there's a tendency people have to, think about the Hollywood component, but the aerospace and shipping, and on so many levels, it really is a dynamic global center.
Yeah, and it's a massive region for the United States.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, when you think of it that way, there's just so much that could help boost its ranking.
Yeah.
So number 6 then. Oh, and I'll just say they're more or less in this spot every year as I look at the past 6 years. And now for this year, number 6, Kearney has Hong Kong,
which is a much better finish than it had in the resonance rankings. The interesting thing for me with Hong Kong is it's kind of a double-edged sword with the strength of that region. I mean, the Pearl River Delta now has, I think, well over 50 million people, depending on, the boundary that you're looking to take from it. Does that actually, strengthen Hong Kong with that around there, or could it potentially lose some ground to Shenzhen and Guangzhou kind of moving forward?
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know how Kearney looks at this, so it's hard to say. It's hard to say.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what is most important, because I don't see Hong Kong going away, but it will be changing for sure in the years to come.
Certainly. They don't have Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, any of those cities in their futures. So it's hard to, I don't know, short of actually being able to talk to them.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, and Hong Kong, it slipped a little bit. They had been 5th for the previous 5 years, and then dropped a little bit to 6th to make way for the current number 5, which is Beijing.
Yeah.
Another surprise Chinese city, or maybe not a surprise. I don't know.
Yeah. So, I think as political power goes, there really is like with respect to Brussels, Beijing is truly probably the world's largest bureaucratic center. And I mean, it has, information exchange and cultural capital covered. It's somewhere that, as China's place in the world continues to rise or be more relevant, I think Beijing will rise as well. And so you notice that the political capitals here, both Beijing and DC do pretty well compared to some other rankings.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's true. And Beijing jumped a little bit. They had been ninth previously for the past 5 years. So they jumped a little bit up to this number 5 spot. And then right in front of them, holding on to number 4 for 6 years in a row. So we're definitely reaching sort of the mainstays.
Yes.
It's Tokyo, at number 4 again.
Oh, yeah. And with Tokyo, it's really, I mean, it's a master case in city. I think really the only thing maybe not elevating as much as the ones above it is maybe it's not quite as cosmopolitan in terms of things linking from around to different corners. But I mean, there's many things that Tokyo, in my opinion, does better than the 3 above it.
Yeah, certainly. I don't know about their different categories and how Tokyo performs, but clearly there's not much change going on,
no.
According to Kearney for these. That number 3, which again, like Tokyo, has been 3 for the last 6 years, is Paris.
Yeah. And again, there's just a steady kind of global presence there. I mean, like with Paris and London kind of doing different things and being known for different things, I think they have different strengths that are perhaps almost complementary to one another. And so I can't help but think that by now that the other one is kind of strengthened by the other, but they're pretty consistently at the top of things like this.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to do a drum roll for number 2 because I think we know 1 and 2 are basically the North American business capital and the European business capital. So let's see, I'll mention number 2 for Kearney is London.
All right, yeah. And of course, London was number 1 in the futures, but it seems like these 2 are a pretty common thread. I know London was number 1 in the residence rankings also,
right.
But came up a bit short this time to our side of the pond.
Right. They're pretty. It's a pretty tight race.
Yes.
And I imagine with resonance too, it was very, very close. Just looking at resonance's rankings by category, and I can't imagine it being any closer between these 2.
Right.
So then by default, New York would be number 1, and yeah, it's hard to argue against either one as a top 2.
Right.
They're pretty, top 2 global city.
There's places that sort of have different things that define them around the globe in so many levels, and really, I mean, even where you have number 3 and number 4, I mean, those are incredible cities in many respects, just as incredible as those, but maybe they don't have that kind of global element. I don't know that I think of Paris or Tokyo in quite that way that I think of London and New York. It's kind of a different. There's a separating factor there for sure.
Right. So just glancing at a quick sort of summary of the changes according to Kearney here, or for the rankings at the top. I'll note that they do say that New York actually widened its lead this year, and probably in large part to the fact that London, for the 3rd year in a row, has seen its overall score drop.
Yeah. So
London is, according to the way they do their metrics, London has been slipping each of the last 3 years. And then they also mentioned Beijing jumping up to the number 5 spot, and say that it's scored higher across most of their categories.
Yeah.
Than in the past. So, so yeah, in large part due to looks like business tech businesses and human capital.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
So there's no shortage of that there. I mean, it's these lists, I mean, they're fun, and I mean, it really is kind of the bread and butter of, like looking at this and speculating what comes out on top. I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's like the AP top 25.
It is, yes. I mean, like, when they come out the college football playoff ranking every year.
Yeah, and as much as we argue about it, that's what matters.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's going to decide who makes it to the college football playoffs. So for us in this kind of thing, we don't really have a definitive ranking. We just it's just a lot of fodder for us to discuss and debate.
Absolutely. So.
All right, Chuck, that was fun.
Right.
Looking forward to the next time
Indeed,
we get together. Yeah. All right.
Hey, everyone.